Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And the Phils have made some big decisions when it comes to tendering contracts. And Austin Hays will not be back with the Phillies in 2025. I'll break down what the decisions mean and why they made them on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space here in Philadelphia. I've been on the radio at 97.5 The Fanatic, talking Philly sports, all the major teams for 5 years now. This is my third season as a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member, and this is my third year as the host of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much again for joining us. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, hitting that subscribe button. Not only will that help you keep up with episodes, it'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted so you never miss any of the big reaction to news that you need to hear to keep up with everything. But also, it's a really great way to help us out here on Locked On Phillies. So if you're willing to do that and you enjoy the content, I would really appreciate it. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can keep the season going with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So go ahead and check them out. Now, it was a big day earlier this weekend for the Philadelphia Phillies when they had the deadline for tendering their or non-tendering contracts to arbitration-eligible players. So basically, and I explained this in a previous episode, our most recent one, but I'll explain it again real quickly in short form. Basically, yesterday was the deadline where they had to decide, hey, are we going to tender a contract, which basically means you can either agree to a contract with somebody or you can start the arbitration process for arbitration-eligible players, or you can choose to non-tender, which means you're just outright releasing that player. That player is being removed. You're not going to go through arbitration with them. You have that option to do that. And the Philadelphia Phillies chose to do the following. So this is from the official tweet. If you haven't seen it yet, buckle up for this one. They have agreed to terms on a contract for the upcoming season with right-handed relief pitcher Jose Ruiz and catcher Garrett Stubbs. Stubbs has agreed to a contract with the team for 2025. I know a lot of people wanted Stubbs gone. They want a different backup catcher. We're going to break down plenty of that, actually. We're going to talk about the decisions on Stubbs and another guy we're talking about with Austin Hays. Those are the two big names in the decision-making process. We're also going to talk about what to look for next as the offseason progresses as we go through today's episode. But Jose Ruiz got a contract. Garrett Stubbs got a contract. Ruiz, totally deserving. We talked about that earlier this week. Stubbs, interesting. Plenty to break down there that we will get into. And then the Philadelphia Phillies tendered contracts to 5 arbitration-eligible players. Bohm, Edmundo Sosa, Bryson Stott. No surprises there at all. It was very, very likely that all of those infielders were going to be able to get that done. Outfielder Brandon Marsh, totally believed that that was going to happen as well. And Ranger Suarez, yeah, duh. So no surprises there for the guys that they went ahead and tendered contracts for. So they'll go through the arbitration process, and we'll see if they can meet in agreement before having to go to arbitration, whatever the case may be. That'll happen as we go through the next couple weeks. But probably the most important decision that the Philadelphia Phillies have made so far this offseason was not tendering a contract to outfielder Austin Hays, who you'll remember the Phillies acquired from the Baltimore Orioles ahead of this past year's trade deadline, and then had a hamstring injury, and then had a kidney infection, and never really made the impact that the Phillies thought that he could make. Now, the Phillies had a club option for him for this year. They could have kept him, and they could have had that handled at a relatively reasonable price point, but the question is, do you believe in the health? Do you want him taking up a roster spot? What's his role on the team going to be? And we're going to break all this down, explaining the decisions on Austin Hays and Garrett Stubbs in a full segment coming up next. But my initial reaction is it's interesting that the Philadelphia Phillies made these moves to keep Stubbs, move on from Hays. Those were the only two things that were surprising. Everything else made total sense. If you're like surprised, let's talk about the other players. Like, if you're surprised they offered a contract to Jose Ruiz, we talked about how he was like sneaky solid for the Philadelphia Phillies bullpen, and he really gained some faith with the manager. And I think with the city as well, as you got deeper into the season, he's not like a high caliber arm, but he's a guy that you need in the bullpen to eat up innings, and you can kind of trust him to go out there and do that. and maybe have some big spots here and there. He deserved it. Bohm, Sosa, Stott, no surprises at all for those guys to be back, especially Bohm and Stott, but Sosa has been a great depth option. Now, this does not mean for a guy like Alec Bohm, oh, well, they tendered him a contract, so they can't trade him. No, you can still trade the player. You can still move him. Like, that is still okay for them to do. So it's not like, oh, well, Bohm is back. Now that you see this, don't go out and buy new Alec Bohm jerseys just yet. There's still a chance he could get moved this offseason. That still is a conversation that's happening around the Phillies and amongst the Phillies and other teams around baseball who may be interested. But it makes no sense to like outright release any of those guys. Same with Brandon Marsh and Ranger Suarez. Now, either of those guys could get moved. We had trade conversations about Ranger Suarez at points. We've had trade conversations about Brandon Marsh at points. And I'm talking about on the podcast. I'm not talking about with the organization. Alec Bohm is the only vocalized, reported, hey, the Phillies are they're shopping him. Everybody else has not been mentioned yet this offseason. Nick Castellanos was last offseason. But the point is, it doesn't guarantee any of these guys are going to be on the roster on opening day 2025. All that it means is everybody but Austin Hays is still currently a member of the Philadelphia Phillies. Austin Hays, no contract. He is now a free agent, so he can go to any team. Now, could the Phillies bring him back? I mean, I guess technically, but they would have just figured out a way to tender a contract to him. Like, this is not the Jeff Hoffman, Carlos Estevez situation where if you non-tender a guy, well, then you're going to go back out and you're going to re-sign him, because arbitration is normally a pretty reasonable way to go about getting a talented player under value. And that's why players fight for the bag so much when they get their big contracts, because you have to spend 6+ years of MLB service time before you can actually earn your worth and test the free market and everything like that. So actually, yeah, I think Austin Hays actually goes to waivers now is the way that it would technically play out. But bottom line is this, like, if they wanted Austin Hays on this ball club, they would have tendered a contract to him. And that's a decision that we're going to break down in a second, but it's one that's interesting for where the Philadelphia Phillies are at. By the way, and this is not something that I've got a chance to get into in today's episode because we have all this information about the tendering, and I want to talk to you about the decisions that Dave Dombrowski made and if the strategy the Philadelphia Phillies seem to be employing this offseason so far is smart. We got some really interesting stuff from Buster Olney. So we're going to talk about that on Monday's episode, the next episode after this one, where we may have gotten an inside scoop on what the Philadelphia Phillies are planning to do. And you should be excited if you're a Philadelphia Phillies fan. So get ready for that, because that's going to take a while to break through and what those potential options are for, hey, maybe a big move waiting in the wings. But this was the first setup. And also, you know what this is, right? This is when you look at the decision to move on from Austin Hays. Could you argue that it's anti-running it back? Sure. Could you argue that not moving on from Garrett Stubbs is pro-running it back? Also, sure. Like, it's tough to tell. I think the ultimate takeaway from just these moves in general, this deadline of what the tender, non-tender deadline means for a team is it's not as impactful as you would think. The only guys that affects are the guys that you don't get the contract, right? From like a fan's point of view, from what you should care about as a fan of the Philadelphia Phillies, the only thing that's changed is Austin Hays is no longer on the team. The other guys, well, a lot of stuff is still up in the air, but you can get a little bit of a sniff, a little bit of a hint, if you will, for what the Phillies could be thinking with certain guys. Now, the five in the middle, right? The infielders and outfielders where they tender the contracts to, we already know that Bohm, Sosa, Stott, Marsh, Ranger, if they're on this team, they're going to be important parts of this team. And if they're not on this team, it's because they're traded for something. And if they're going to be traded for something, it probably won't be a surprise, like we saw with Alec Bohm. So, well, not like he's been traded already, but that we heard reports already. And that's not going to catch us completely off guard if they move on from Alec Bohm. Like, I don't think they're going to surprise trade Bryson Stott or something out of the blue. I think we're going to hear about these rumors before anybody gets moved. So, there's not as much. People were up in arms about a lot of stuff yesterday when they saw these moves come down from the Philadelphia Phillies. It's not as big of a vote of confidence for the guys still on the team as you think. It's more of a vote of no confidence for Austin Hays, which I can't figure it out. It's super weird to me based on things that Dave Dombrowski has said and based on what this team needs. But we're going to break down those two decisions specifically and kind of weigh them against each other. Stubbs stays, Hays goes, as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Let's talk about Game Time first, though. Game Time is the absolute best, and they have a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. What Game Time's Picks does is Game Time Picks, I should say, filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. It really, really streamlines the experience for you, and they've got a lot of other features that streamline the experience for you as well. First of all, they've got all-in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front, no surprise fees at checkout, and you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. They have the game time guarantee, which means they'll credit you 110% of the difference if you find a seat in the same row and section for less. And your ticket purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. And it's not just sports. It's comedy, concerts, theater. Of course, it's all major sports as well. But take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. And download the Game Time app, create an account. And if you use code LOCKEDONMLB, which you should, you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, let's actually dive a little bit deeper into these Garrett Stubbs, Austin Hays decisions. I'm going to start with the Garrett Stubbs thing because this seemed to bother the heck out of people. And everybody, you got to do your research, right? Before you start getting up in arms about decisions that the team is making. And you got to take a deep breath when it comes to the backup catcher. I have told you multiple times on this podcast, right? And this is part of the reason I'm here. I'm not like judging people, I guess, for not doing research, because that's kind of what part of my job here is, to talk about some of the stuff that people may not truly like break down the right way the first time they see it, which is fine. It's annoying when people jump to conclusions about, well, Stubbs is back, I hate this, Dombrowski's an idiot, whatever. Like, let me break it down for you. So first of all, I've said multiple times on this podcast, I think Garrett Stubbs needs to not be the backup catcher of this team next year. Now, him receiving a contract for 2025 does not mean that he is automatically the backup catcher at the major league level. He does have a minor league option remaining, which means he can be sent down during the course of the season. But like, you could put him at AAA. He could be a guy that you keep with the organization because you say, hey, we need good people in this organization. And Garrett Stubbs is a good person. He's a good teammate. He's a likable guy. Maybe he has value at AAA to teach some young players, and maybe not even like teach them. I tell you what, like, Garrett Stubbs doesn't get enough credit for being a solid defensive catcher, so he can teach some baseball things, but also just like kind of a bridge between AAA and the major league team. Who knows? I don't know. People turn their nose up at the vibes conversation, but the Phillies locker room has been a big part of their success over the past 3 years. And Garrett Stubbs has been a big part of that locker room culture. And that doesn't mean he's guaranteed a spot on the team for life. And when you have JT Realmuto starting to lose a step and you need better backup catcher play, well, it makes total sense to look in a different direction than Garrett Stubbs, which is why I've been on that train for a while. But the amount of people who saw when we tendered a contract, or we signed Garrett Stubbs to a 2025 contract and said, oh, he's going to be the backup catcher again. How are they running it back with Garrett Stubbs? That is no guarantee of anything. All you're doing, right, if you don't sign Garrett Stubbs to a 2025 contract or tender an agreement with him or figure it out the way that the Philadelphia Phillies did, you're releasing him for nothing, right? You're just letting an asset go. Like, you might say, well, Garrett Stubbs isn't really that much of an asset. Well, I don't know. I know inflation's crazy. I know the economy's crazy. Stay with me. This is going to make sense in a second. A dollar doesn't buy you anything anymore. A dollar doesn't mean anything the way that prices are going up. But if you had a dollar, you're like, well, it's not big enough an asset. Do you just throw it on the ground? Do you just like walk out your front door, just like, I don't know, leave it on the sidewalk? No, you keep it because having the dollar is better than not having the dollar. It costs you nothing to keep it. And it goes ahead and it would cost you, like, you get nothing back by just letting it go. Now, the one part of that analogy that doesn't really crossovers. It does cost you to keep Garrett Stubbs. You got to pay him. And if you had outright released him, you wouldn't have had to. But his salary is minimal. It's a drop in the bucket compared to what John Middleton's spending on this team. So I'm not worried about it yet. Now, if we see, trust me, there will be a time to freak out over this move. If we see going into spring training, there has not been another catcher added, and Rafael Marchand hasn't gotten the vote of confidence to be the backup over Garrett Stubbs, and you roll into spring training down in Clearwater with a look that says Garrett Stubbs is probably going to be the backup catcher again, then we could start to panic. But until we get to that point, this means nothing about the position he's going to have. It doesn't even mean he's going to be on the Major League roster or make the opening day roster, play a single inning with the Major League club. It just means he's going to be part of the organization. So slow your roll for saying, awful move by Dombrowski. This is just, we want to keep the guy in the organization because we don't want to outright cut him because we think he still has some value in some way to this team or the organization as a player, as a person, whatever it may be. And I think that's a fair assessment of Garrett Stubbs and what he's done in this city. I'm not telling you he's a Major League caliber backup catcher right now, but I'm telling you that there may be some reason you might want to hang on to him in some capacity with a minor league team, right? That's it. Now, the Austin Hays thing is equally as interesting, but got a little bit less response yesterday because everyone likes to be riled up about Stubbs because this was kind of the year where everything, the whole vibes went out the window. It's, hey, we get you like to have fun, and not just Stubbs, but the Phillies team, but we need you to win something. We're tired of it ending short, and it's hard to be likable when you fall short of your goal every time, even if it is a very likable team. So that's why the Stubbs thing was more of a lightning rod decision by Dave Dombrowski and the Phillies. And I think it was the right one, by the way, as I just broke down for you. But the Hays decision to me is equally as interesting because this is a guy that you went out and you acquired at the deadline and you believed was going to be a quality bat for you, right-handed bat out in left field to balance out Brandon Marsh, who can't hit lefties. Austin Hays tore the cover off the ball against lefties. And when you looked at those numbers, when you acquired him, you said, well, that's a pretty darn good fit. And then it was a question of, is he going to be an everyday guy? And are you going to platoon Marsh and Rojas? Are you going to platoon Marsh and Hays and then play Rojas every day in center field for the defense? But whatever the case may be, the fit for Austin Hays, if your outfield next year is still going to be Brandon Marsh, Johan Rojas, Nick Castellanos as other guys on this team, and it very well could be. Austin Hays seemed to fit really well. And the problem is you didn't really get a good look at how he actually fit because of injuries and health issues, and that sucks, and Dave Dombrowski had to make kind of a blind decision on this one, right? So let me ask you, if you had to make a decision that you were 100% confident in, if you had a guy and it's just like, I think he could be good, but I'm not sure, and I'm gambling here. And the amount of money that I'd be paying Austin Hays would be, well, it would be a gamble that could stop me from building this baseball team the other way. Even if it's a coin flip, I can kind of understand why Dave Dombrowski cut Austin Hays loose and said, yeah, I just can't take the chance of paying you. And then we're going to have to give you a roster spot because of what we're paying you. What if you stink? And I kind of want to have more flexibility. You remember the conversation we talked about where we've brought it up a couple times on the podcast. The changes the Philadelphia Phillies are going to make to not, quote unquote, run it back this offseason are going to be in the margins. It's not Harper. It's not Turner. It's not like Schwarber. It's not JT. Like it's not Wheeler, Nola. No, their main core of great players are going to be largely the same. But when you get to those fringe guys, the last guys in the order, the rotational outfield pieces, the guys you acquired at the deadline, Austin Hays, a perfect example. This seemed to be a, hey, could you be good? Sure. Do I know if you're going to be good? We haven't seen enough due to injuries, and that sucks. And it's not anything against the player. Like, I think Austin Hays gets unnecessary crap sometimes from the fan base because I look at him and I say he has the makings of a solid baseball outfielder. His numbers look projectable. I think he got a raw deal here in Philadelphia, and I can't put like all of that on him. Like the injury issues suck. He's not happy about that. He didn't try and get hurt, and we didn't get a true look at what exactly he could be for this team. But because we didn't get that true look, Dave Dombrowski has to gamble. And would you rather take a chance, or would you rather increase your optionality of how you build this roster by not taking a chance? That feels like a win-win, even if Austin Hays goes somewhere else and is a really good player. Like, and maybe he will. But what removing Austin Hays does is he puts you in a situation, well, Dave Dombrowski puts himself in a situation where now you potentially have an open starting outfield spot, right? So you can go and acquire somebody to play corner outfield that maybe is even better than Austin Hays, where if you had signed him to or tendered a contract with him, you would basically be locked into it's Hays, it's Marsh, it's Castellanos, it's Rojas, unless you move one of those guys or sign somebody else. And I don't think that would have been the right move. So you know what? When we break everything down, I think Austin Hays got a bit of a raw deal based on the player he could be, but it's not the Phillies' fault and it's not his fault. It was just a tough situation for him based on injury. He's one of those guys that I'm going to be like, I'm not going to really root for him because he doesn't have those big moments in Philadelphia. And he's only here for a cup of coffee, but he's not a guy that I'm like, get him out of town. He's just one of those, didn't work out, not mad at you. Hope you're not mad at us. Good luck with your next team. The Stubbs decision made sense to me. The Hays decision made sense to me. All the other decisions made sense to me. I think the Philadelphia Phillies handled that situation really, really well when it came to the non-tender agreements and everything like that. And the two toughest decisions they've had to make so far this offseason with Stubbs and Hays, I think they nailed both of them. And it takes a second to break down why, but if you really start to think through a lot of people see this as, I don't know, just a single move on a board. But this is a chess game, and you got to look ahead. You got to think about, what am I setting up? What does this move allow me to do in the future? And so many people see the name of the player and the decision the team makes, and they jump to conclusions about what that means for the offseason. Dave Dombrowski is a master at this. He knows what he's doing. I think those moves make logical sense based on optionality, which is a word I'm going to continue to use with this team, and one that I think Dave Dombrowski would echo as one of the goals for this offseason, as much as you can with a buttoned-up roster. Any optionality that you can get, pieces to move, openings to create, are hugely beneficial, and I think they did that. So a good day for Dave Dombrowski, as most big days are for Dave Dombrowski, the future Hall of Fame executive. And anyone who's upset about these moves, well, we'll see how it plays out in the future. You could end up being right about the Stubbs thing. And if that's the case, we will have that conversation then. But as of today, I think they handled it well. And now it's time to turn our attention to what comes next for the Philadelphia Phillies and what comes next this offseason. So we'll discuss that coming up as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Phillies. All right, well, let's talk about FanDuel first, because you got to be ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So honestly, what are you waiting for? FanDuel's the best. It's a great deal. It's a great time of the year to get in on sports betting. A lot of hockey, basketball, college football, pro football, all of it going on, all of it available to bet on at FanDuel. So never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So what comes next for the Philadelphia Phillies? Like, what should you be, as a fan of the Phillies, turning your attention to? Well, this is going to be the time where you start to focus on free agents. And this is the time where we, in podcast form, will begin to turn our attention to the same thing. So the main free agent that I've talked about is Shohei Ohtani. Juan Soto. I'm still thinking about last year. Man, it would be nice to have Shohei. It'd be nice to have Juan Soto too. He's going to be the guy that leads the sweepstakes. The guy that's probably getting the most buzz surrounding the Philadelphia Phillies right now is Alex Bregman, and part of that comes from the Alec Bohm trade rumors. And I've heard from a reliable source that the Phillies' interest in Alex Bregman exists, okay? I'm not saying like that is the apple of their eye, the guy they got to go get, but I've heard there's interest there, like concrete interest for the Philadelphia Phillies to sign Alex Bregman, which I've broken that down. But we haven't really gotten into the top free agents available, the guys to really keep an eye on. So we're going to start to do that as we break into the week of Thanksgiving and we start to look ahead. We're going to go ahead and peek at the free agent market. Obviously, as it always is in baseball, it's slow developing. That's been more of a recent trend these past couple years, but it has been a slow developing start. We know that that's the thing. Bryce Harper didn't sign till what, February, March, whatever. He actually ended up signing with the Philadelphia Phillies. Manny Machado did the same thing. So you're looking at a situation where we have time. I wouldn't be looking at, oh, well, who are the Phillies signing tomorrow? It's going to take a little bit of time. And normally the mark for when the offseason really gets rolling is the winter meetings, because all the teams get together. It's when you really get a chance to hash out everything. So it almost feels like up until the winter meetings, it's the team handling a lot of interior stuff, right? Dave Dombrowski looking at what you have to do with tender, non-tender, what you're looking at for guys that you may want to bring back, how you're going to handle arbitration, what moves you could make, kind of laying out your plan for the offseason. This year, December 8th through the 12th are the winter meetings, and that's Dallas, Texas, the location for the winter meetings this time around. But yeah, listen, today, as I'm recording this, it's Sunday, November 24th. We are only, and I got to go to my calendar app to actually do it, 2 weeks away from the winter meetings beginning on this very date. It's the 14-day mark out from the winter meetings. So once that rolls around, we'll start to get a little bit more news on where things could break down. So that's going to be the next thing to focus on. But for the next 2 weeks leading up to that winter meeting, what we're going to do is we're going to round out some evaluating of depth pieces for the Philadelphia Phillies. I know I've gone through a good amount of the bullpen. We're going to finish out some of those, but this was a busier episode with obviously breaking news, or not really breaking news, but like recent news on the Phillies roster decisions. But we're going to round that out. We're going to go through some depth pieces, and we're also going to begin to take a look at some of the biggest free agent names that are out there and the ones that could potentially fit the best with the Philadelphia Phillies. Not that they have a lot of room to add, which, again, brings us back to that Austin Hays conversation, why it was so key for them to give themselves the opportunity to find somebody else to fill that role. Like, unless you were very confident that Austin Hays was going to be the best or one of the best options you could possibly have to play the outfield for you this year, you kind of had to let him go to allow yourself to make changes. And let's go back to that real quick. Because one thing that I can imagine someone saying right now is, well, why didn't you do it with Brandon Marsh, right? Why wouldn't it be Brandon Marsh? Why was it Austin Hays? Well, Brandon Marsh has been with the organization for a couple of years. Brandon Marsh has more stock with this team. Brandon Marsh is part of the culture of the team. And he's a guy that, the Phillies have had more time to evaluate. They've had him in-house. Like, they know what Brandon Marsh's skills are. They know what his weaknesses are. They know what makes him tick. They know this guy well. Austin Hays had a cup of coffee here. So if you're going to make a gamble, wouldn't you rather bet on the data that you have more of than the one that you just like, I don't really know. We barely got to see him play. Like, that's why the Brandon Marsh decision was easy and the Austin Hays decision was hard, because Hays is a relative stranger to the organization. And Marsh has been a guy that has had moments and been around this team, and you know how he works and you know what he can bring. And I'm not saying that Marsh is going to be here. I'm not saying he's going to be a starting corner outfielder or center fielder for this team. I'm just saying teams get really comfortable with guys that they know fit in a culture, fit in a locker room, fit schematically with the team. And I know baseball is not so much a scheme sport, but you know what I mean? Like, can build into the lineup a way where you could win a significant amount of games, and the Philadelphia Phillies can still win a significant amount of games, even though we're still all annoyed about the postseasons of the past couple of years. And that just, Austin Hays was the odd man out. He was a new guy in town. He didn't get enough playing time. Now, does that mean that guys like Carlos Estevez, who the Phillies acquired at the deadline, he's now a free agent? Does that make it look more dangerous for him to come back? I don't know if there's really correlation there, because you also saw Estevez be really good for the Philadelphia Phillies. But again, this is why now you turn your attention to free agent players. And also, we have the Rule 5 draft coming up at some point. That's one other thing I wanted to highlight. Rule 5 draft date. I can't remember that anyway. And yeah, the Rule 5, the Phillies will probably not make any decisions at all in the Rule 5 draft. And by make any decisions, they probably won't look at a situation where they're selecting players. You can just forego your selection because you have to put that guy on the 40-man if you don't have a spot for him. It will be at the end of the winter meetings, so you've still got time for that. But that's another thing that we'll do an episode on, or a segment of an episode on. Free agency, winter meetings, and then the Rule 5 draft are the big things coming up in the next couple weeks on the MLB offseason schedule. Man, I'll tell you one thing, folks, as we get closer to Thanksgiving, can't wait till we get baseball back because it's offseason. It gets longer every year when the Phillies get knocked out earlier every year. But either way, still some great content coming your way here on Locked On Phillies. So thank you for being along for the ride for it. That's all for today's episode. So please make sure you're rating, reviewing, subscribing to the YouTube, all that great stuff that I talked to you about at the start of the episode. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I will talk to you tomorrow on the next episode of Locked On Phillies.